Which hitters off to slow starts have us most concerned? I mean, both of the sections from the notes that you established here have a guy on the top of it that I'm past concerned. I'm just out on them. And we start with Javi Baez. I just think he's done.
Yes, his I think OPS, not batting average. OPS is under 300 going into our recording on Sunday. So that's we're at a point now where you're not concerned. You're just starting to think this kind of is who the player is at this point. Now, I don't think he'll stay at 300, but are we talking about a season where is maybe one of the worst players in it still? Yes. And so, right, you're not quite as concerned anymore. You're disappointed if you're a Tigers fan. You're probably disappointed too if you're a Cubs fan. But I think Cubs fans are dealing with that a lot right now as they look around the league. And Cubs fans are a little surprised right now that Chris Bryant is receiving such vitriol in Colorado after everything Bryant was able to do as a Rookie of the Year, follows it up with the MVP. They win the World Series in 2016, still very much beloved on the North Side, but he's been struggling in a major way with the Rockies. The numbers have not been good in his 2 seasons. We're going into year 2 and 2+, and he's still yet to play 162 games with the Rockies. He sat out on Sunday with a lower back issue. And even when he's been on the field, he hasn't been very good. There's been multiple 9th inning, 3 swings outside of the zone with the bases loaded to strike out that we've seen. And fans have been booing him. And it's been hard, I think, for the fan base in general to figure out what to do with this guy that was, so great and is getting paid, such top dollar. But for Cubs fans, they still love their Chris Bryant. They're still going to love Javi Baez, but both those two guys right now are really struggling, and the doubts are strong enough where, or the concerns maybe are strong enough that they're just full-fledged doubts now.
It's, I was just looking at the contract details on both of them. Javi's got 4 years left, not quite 100 million, but close. I think it's 98 if you look at from the start of this season. And Chris Bryant looks like it's like 130 over 5 left. I mean, these guys, I know I wrote an article, worst contracts in baseball at some point. I think it might have been this offseason. And these guys were featured prominently on that list. And with Bryant, I've always felt like, all right, there's a good player in there somewhere. I just haven't given up on him. But and especially when you have a guy that's injured, like Javi Baez, he's been healthy this whole time. He's just terrible. I mean, he's been on the field and hasn't been able to produce. At least Chris Bryant, you can use injuries as an excuse, but how long, as someone who's been watching these games a lot closer than I have, how long is that a valid excuse? Are you seeing any semblance of hope in at least, his discipline in these at-bats, or has he just looked completely lost?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to say he has looked rather lost at the plate, and even talking with some people within the Rockies staff saying, so what's going on with Chris Bryant? We're kind of curious where, if you could pinpoint something, and hearing a comment of get in line, because a lot of people really want to know around the team right now. And he's putting in the work, good clubhouse guy in general, but at the end of the day, for the fan base, they're seeing a guy with a pretty hefty price tag coming right after the heels of the Nolan Arenado trade, and really just kind of being the human embodiment, the representation of the ownership right now of different things. I mean, Ian Desmond was booed, and his contract was half of what Chris Bryant was making, and it was so bad for Ian Desmond that he basically left $20 million on the table during the pandemic to say, I'd just rather not even be around this organization, this fan base right now, because of obviously things happening during the pandemic and whatnot. But even still, it's kind of been a bad scene for Chris Bryant and the Rockies right now. And there's little hope. Maybe if he gets healthy, you can get something out of him again, right? We saw Albert Pujols, really banged up for most of his tenure with the Angels, and then was able to put together 6 months with the Cardinals there at the end, where you said, oh, maybe he's got another year left in him, but he left it all out there. He emptied the tank. So I think for Tigers and Rockies fans, they're hoping that Javi Baez and Chris Bryant can either empty the tank or just do some kind of reset, factory reset to go back to what they were paying when they first signed him.
When you see all these former Cubs, and I guess it's not each of them because, Contreras was still good with the Cardinals last year and Rizzo's had his moments with the Yankees, but playing those day games at Wrigley is such a unique experience. And as a young player, you come up in that. I don't know how that alone can zap you of everything, just leaving it. I feel like it's part of the issue. But yeah, it's amazing to think these guys that we thought were going to be, prominent stars in the game for a really long time just have not found their way back. And that a lot of them sort of peaked. I mean, the best guy from that team is now Kyle Schwarber. I mean, Kyle Schwarber from that 2016 team, he's the guy that's still producing. So it's just been a really surprising turn. And another guy on our list here, since we've talked a little Cubs, is Cody Bellinger. He's got off to a rough start. He's definitely someone to watch, right? There was a reason that there wasn't a team out there, unless it was just complete mismanagement from Scott Boras. But
No, it wasn't that one. Definitely wasn't that one.
Yeah, it wasn't that Scott. I had to think that they could have got like a 7 for 150 somewhere, but regardless, he settles on the short-term deal. He does have a couple of years, but if he puts up even one bad season on this 3-year deal and doesn't get right back into the market, I don't know if that 7-year deal will ever come for Cody Bellinger. It's not to say he can't bounce back. We're in the middle of April, but it's just a name that we're going to be watching really closely this year.
It's even harder for him, I think, to go out and get a contract of that size, partially because he's done this before where there's too many ebbs and flows in his career, despite the fact that you say, well, there's still an MVP caliber candidate that's in there, but I might not get it every single year, right? There's some questions about those dips in performance, like you said, that we're seeing at the start of 2024. So I think that is definitely going to negatively impact his market. We'll wait and see if he decides to keep Scott Boras as his agent. We know Jordan Montgomery decided to go a different way. So his next contract, Scott Boras will not be touching any of that. So he's been a disappointment. Here's a guy that was also a Cub for a minute. You might recall Nick Castellanos. He's struggling a little bit for the Phillies. If you go back and actually look at what he's done in the regular season with Philadelphia, it hasn't been that great. It hasn't been necessarily all-star caliber. I think he might have been an all-star last year, but still, he's been more of that postseason player. He's been a catalyst for the team in those big moments. We know if something tragic happens in the world, Nick Castellanos is going to hit a home run. So if the rapture ever does come, Ryan, Nick Castellanos for MVP. I mean, that's a lock. I think we know that. So he's another guy that's been struggling a little bit, that I probably have less concerns than the Baez, Bryant, maybe even for Cody Bellinger, because I think Bellinger has that higher ceiling that you're going to miss out on if he doesn't really come to fruition, whereas Castellanos, I don't think has, those same general expectations.
Castellanos, it's kind of an on-year, off-year, at least that's what it's been in Philly. I mean, it's interesting. You actually look at 2022 and 2023, got his stats pulled up. The average is within 10 points of each other. The on base, same thing. I'd imagine the strikeout and walk rates are probably similar. The only difference is 2023, he hit 29 home runs. 2012, he hit 13 home runs, and he drove in an additional 44 runs with all those homers. So he's got to drive the ball out of the yard if he's going to be effective. And then we saw kind of a similar thing in the playoffs, if I remember. I'm trying to find the postseason stats now because he had one series. Yeah, the NLDS last year, he hit 467 and hit 4 bombs. And then in the NLCS, he disappeared. 1 home run, struck out 11 times in 24 at-bats, hit 42, 0-4-2. So he's a streaky hitter in general, which also means, hey, he can have a hot streak and balloon those numbers. But I think luckily for him and the Phillies, I don't think Castellanos is going to necessarily kind of tank their season. They've had good results with the struggling Castellanos. I'm not overly concerned, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Nick Castellanos looked like 2022 Nick Castellanos again. Like that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I would agree about that. I know I talked a little bit about Chris Bryant, seeing him and those concerns and those worries. From the Mets side of things, Francisco Lindor off to, somewhat of a slow start. I feel like this might be somewhat common for him because you look at the end of every season and he ends up putting those numbers up. Are you concerned about the slow start from Frankie, or is this kind of par for the course?
I'm not too worried about it because, yeah, he is a slow starter in general. This has been a really it's gotten a little drastic with how slow of a start it has been, but they just went on a road trip. I got to check this weekend if he struck out, but they went on a road trip this past week for Cincinnati and Atlanta, and across the 6 games played, 29 plate appearances, he didn't strike out once. So that just tells me, like, all right, his timing is still off a little bit, but he's not giving up at bats. From what I've seen, the at bats have generally been pretty good. His right-handed swing is fine. So the problem is that's the shorter, side of the splits that you're going to get because he's going to face way more righties. So he needs to get that left-handed swing going. I've seen Mets fans say just bat right-handed all the time. Look, Lindor hasn't faced a righty batting righty probably ever. So I don't know if that is the best call to action for him. Last year, his splits actually were a little bit more skewed where slightly better left-handed. It was kind of the same guy each way. I think Lindor is going to be fine. And what he gives you with the leadership and the defense, you don't worry about it too much. It's definitely a guy to monitor, but I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, you got to hope so if the Mets are going to make a go at it here in Pete Alonso's final season before free agency. And look, if we're talking about big, burly first baseman, Spencer Torkelson is one of those players where, we like the Tigers roster. We like the additions that they made in the offseason, but that only works if you get major production out of those key young players that are still establishing themselves. And Spencer Torkelson obviously is a huge part of that. So, his performance at the plate in the early going, obviously a little bit concerning there. We know that with a lot of those central teams, even in the Northeast, it's been cold. The bats really don't get heated up a little bit early or this early in the year. So you can certainly make an excuse. But if the Tigers are really going to make a run at this thing, Torkelson definitely needs to be a major part in the middle of that lineup.
Yeah, he's the one that I looked at where I thought this conversation was the most interesting because we just like with Lindor, we're like, all right, we've seen slow starts, we've seen him break out of it. And you could say Torkelson last year, he was very much a second half player. I'm actually pulling up the splits right now to see exactly how much of a difference it was. He batted 220 to 230, but the WRC plus went from 95 in the first half to 121 in the second half. And it was because of that second half that a lot of people were expecting him to break out this year. He had 19 home runs in the second half, 12 in the first half. The thing for me with Spencer Torkelson is you look at these rebuilding teams, right? With Baltimore, you had Adley Rutschman and Jackson Holiday 1-1, going first round, first overall. We've seen Royce Lewis. When he's on the field, he looks like that guy. Spencer Torkelson, a first overall pick, he is so important to the Tigers' rebuild and now trying to contend because of that. He's a first baseman where they need him to be a 40 and 100 guy. Like he has to be that run producer in the middle of the lineup. And there's just been very large stretches of his still, small sample size of a career, but from his career so far, where we've seen this guy go ice cold. So he's a guy that I think the Tigers, more than anyone, would have liked to see get off to a fast start because they need him in the middle of that lineup.
I think the biggest shadow in baseball, and it still exists even a decade after this guy has retired, is in New York. If you're a shortstop for the Yankees, Derek Jeter, leader, all the World Series rings, we know that. And that shadow still looms large for someone like Anthony Volpe, who grew up watching him. But in other cities and in other markets, there are still those shadows. And I think for Spencer Torkelson, again, without being in that market and reading the newspapers and going online every day, that there's conversations going on about, well, what did Miguel Cabrera mean to this organization? What he was able to do, this first ballot Hall of Famer, first base DH. And so Spencer Torkelson really is trying to fill those shoes a little bit. And you have to, wonder if you press a little bit, which is very common for young players. It's common for more veteran players. I've seen many guys do that in the early season when your team is struggling, trying to do way too much on both sides of the ball. So you have to wonder how much of that's a factor for Torkelson saying, all right, Miggy's gone. Now I need to step up, maybe be more of a leader in the clubhouse, certainly be a bigger leader on the box score and over at first base in the middle of that lineup. So that could be a part of the equation as well.
A couple interesting parts from what you said there. From one, Zach Short, who's on the Mets now, is listening to his podcast, The Compound, and it was talking about facing the Tigers. Just one of the comments that he said is that that's a clubhouse that is very much run by the young players because the young players have been there longer than the veterans. I'm sure some of these guys like Mark Canha, Gio Rochelle that came in are getting a voice, but it's that young core, it's their team. So that really is something that he maybe does have that extra weight on his shoulders to be that leader. And also, I think maybe a future who's better topic is going to be the guys that cast the shadow, because when you mentioned that, I know for the Mets, David Wright has cast a shadow over third base for a long time. And just now we're seeing a couple weeks of Brett Beatty offer a glimmer of hope. But yeah, when you have a player that mans a position for a decade and is so identified with that franchise, it is hard to find the next one. So yeah, that's a lot on Torkelson's shoulders. And I wanted to also look at the Cardinals, and I was thinking again with the Shadows, like, well, I guess Paul Goldschmidt, did he kind of erase the Pujols shadow, though they were teammates for a little bit there? But that's one that's concerning. Just looking at the Cardinals, the two guys at the corner, Goldschmidt and Arenado, because they had, they both were MVP, first and third in MVP, I believe, in 2022, and they took a step back last year. Goldschmidt going to be a free agent this year at 36, 37. So getting off the slow starts, that's definitely another couple that we got to monitor.
Yeah, as you said, the age being a question of, okay, is this really where we finally start to see that decline? And there could be just, again, some ebbs and flows, right, where you take a step back and then you kind of normalize just a little bit. That's hard to know, and it's going to happen at some point, right? I think Cardinals fans are probably a little surprised when so much has turned over on that roster and almost within the organization, at least in regards to their success. Nolan Arenado probably a little bit more puzzling because of how consistent he's been throughout his career. I mean, you look at last year, and when it came to consistency, he had 10 consecutive Gold Gloves to start his career, something that only Ichiro Suzuki had accomplished at that point. Several Platinum Glove awards he had won, and yet wasn't even a finalist defensively. So still had a good year with 26 homers and 93 RBI at the plate. But he's also going through. They both only have one homer. I think they're both under 10 RBI each. And so if that franchise is going to have, any hope of resetting and getting back to the postseason, it's integral for them to go out and be the perennial all-stars and perennial MVP candidates that they've been. Because if it's not, I mean, that hoists a lot of pressure on the shoulders of so many of those young guys that have been doing it a little bit here and there over the last couple of years. They're going to be forced, all the different Nolan Gorman, Dylan Carlson types, Mason Wynn now, Jordan Walker, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes a lot less feasible and sustainable, really, to be a contender, even in a weak division like the NL Central.
You're right, and honestly, having those veterans performing makes it easier on all those guys, because it just takes the pressure off. So like you said, now the pressure is ratcheted up. It's not necessarily an environment that's as conducive to get the performance out of the young guys that you need. So that's it puts the Cardinals in question when those guys aren't clicking. When they're great, the team generally can follow. So there are definitely a few, and a couple more that fit that boat. I want to go through Byron Buxton now, because this Twins team has had a rough start, and they're just getting ravaged by injury. Carlos Correa now on the IL. Royce Lewis out for an extended period. Byron Buxton is healthy. So part of me wants to just shake off the slow start offensively and say, hey, at least he's making diving Superman catches again in the outfield. It's awesome to see Byron Buxton back on the field. But now there is a ton of pressure on him to deliver offensively, because that lineup looks a lot weaker than we were all expecting, this offseason.
In the 8 years since he debuted, he's played over 100 games once in his career. That's what we're dealing with. He's played 92 games twice. So by no means am I trying to skew the numbers there. So yeah, the health piece is critical for the Twins as a team right now, but also for Byron Buxton. And I think, we see this with more with pitchers than position players, where the pitchers go out and just ratchet it up to as close to 100 as you can. And all right, if you get hurt, we kind of expect that, right? To give it your 100%, and then it's kind of accepted. And for position players, I think that's true for some of them. I mean, think of the early days of Bryce Harper in his career, where he's trying to run through walls almost literally, and he had to kind of scale things back, and that didn't hurt his production. But we're at a point now with Byron Buxton that, what? We need you to be healthy. And so being healthy might take a certain edge away from, the best version of himself. So, how much is he learning to be a new player at, his age 30 season, where he has to kind of maybe not go 100% so that he can play over 100 games and be there for his team each and every day in the lineup. That could lead to some productivity issues.
Yeah, you really do have to, if you want to be available, you got to pick and choose the times to go after it. And I've heard, you look at Brandon Nimmo as a player, kind of similar to Buxton as far as the earlier part of the career where he kept on getting hurt. And Jay Bruce really instructed him on, look, there's times where you go crashing into the wall and there's times where you don't. In the fourth inning, don't go crashing the wall to make a catch. If it's a tie game and it's the eighth inning, and that's the difference between winning the ball game, all right, that's when you got to put your body on the line. But sometimes you really got to hold it back. And hopefully Buxton has learned that lesson. And because he has been so productive in the, whenever he has been healthy in the past, I imagine he's going to get to some semblance of himself offensively. But right now they need him to be like a MVP type offensive player. And I don't know if he still has that in him after not playing much over the last couple of years. Now we end this segment with the guy I'm least concerned about. And that's Julio Rodriguez. He got off to a slow start last year. He figured it out. I am not concerned about the young superstar. Are you concerned at all about him?
A little bit.
Okay.
More a little bit. And I don't know if you saw today's Mariners game, but he got picked off of first base with 2 outs in the ninth. That's what's concerning me.
Yeah.
Okay. Coupled with his productivity. So in that sense, again, is it doing too much? Does he need some kind of reset? I think it would be extreme to say, they would option him down to the minors, a guy who was an MVP pick for a lot of people, but the Rockies had to do that with Kyle Freeland, 4th in Cy Young Award voting in 2018, get sent down to the minors because things just kind of got out of whack for him a little bit the season after. So I think we still have a ways to go before something like that happens in Seattle. But I think there's concerns that, maybe he is trying to do a little too much. Another guy that, who is he living in the shadow of? Ken Griffey Jr., because he's the face of the franchise. He is in many ways the face of Major League Baseball. He's doing commercials with Ichiro Suzuki. Yes, he's been doing that, for the last couple years. So it's by no means this brand new environment or situation that he's been thrust into. But players in their career, they always want to be taking steps forward. I've seen it many times with different guys who, really wanted to establish themselves just as an everyday ball player, right? The average lifespan of a big leaguer is like 3 years. So you make it to the show and then you're trying to just establish yourself. I've seen hundreds of those guys. Then you got guys who establish themselves and now they're trying to take it to the next level and become all-star. There's maybe hundreds of them. Or there's 100 of them, I should say. And then you got guys that already all are all-stars and they want to be MVP caliber players. Nolan Arenado was like that. That was a source of some of his frustration before ultimately wanting to get out of Colorado. And so is Julio really trying to bite off more than he can chew? Again, don't really know unless you're down there on the beat. But I'm concerned, and I hope that he does get the support and whatever it is that he needs right now, he gets that because it hasn't been good. It's not been good so far.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where the whole team has really struggled, and you're right, that might make him try to do more, but I think the talent, like I would be stunned if he didn't end up with a productive season. But yeah, you're right. He came into this year and I am sure that he had that goal written right on top of his page. I'm sure, of course, World Series, all of the team stuff, but the personal goals, he wants to be an MVP. And he very much at this point in his career has been on kind of a Mike Trout-esque start where it's like, this could be that next guy that we're all going to say is the best player in baseball for a decade. So he's got to really produce. And if he does produce, Patrick, you know where he's going to end up?
Cooperstown?
SNL. How about that? We didn't think about J-Rod.
Yes, that's the one. You nailed it. You nailed it.
Circle. All right.
Look, I'm concerned, but yes, would I be more inclined to say he's going to figure it out? Absolutely. Yeah. Right. It ate at him a little bit in a good way that Ronald Acuna is getting all the attention for being the power speed combo. Julio was close, right? 32 homers, 37 RBI, or 37 stolen bases. So like it's in his head. Like he's aware of that. And again, maybe it's just doing too much. So I'm concerned that he's put that kind of pressure on him, but I'm sure Scott Service and his staff are going to talk to him and say, we love you, J-Rod. You're good. You can't win you can't break a tie or get us the tie from first base with 2 outs like that. You're not going to steal all 3 bases. So he's got to figure some things out. Hopefully Monday will be an off day for him. He can reset.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.